This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Alright guys, so let's just get right into it. I feel like over the years, I've been making videos about zone focusing and manual focusing for street photography, but they've all kind of seemed a little bit more complicated. The way they were just explained, I feel like were a little bit more complicated than it needed to be. So in today's episode, I'm going to be offering up my zone focusing tips and try to break it down in the most simple way possible to where everybody who's just starting out with film, or maybe somebody that's already been shooting for a long time, can really digest and understand, because zone focusing is one of those techniques that I feel like not only a lot of people should use, but it's also one that gets often overlooked because it seems more complicated than it actually is. That's what this video is about, you guys. Grab your camera, have a lens on it, and let's get started. Alright you guys, so if you've ever done any street photography before, you may have heard of the term zone focusing. Now zone focusing essentially is a technique that photographers use with manual focus lenses. And this technique allows you to pretty much preset a predetermined range of focus that allows you to capture that range without having to mess around with your camera. And this technique allows you to preset a specific range, for example, 1 feet to 5 feet of focus before you take the photograph, so that you can catch somebody in the frame in focus without having to do that all in one motion. I'm gonna take these straps off, make it a little bit easier. Now, the way we do that, folks, is actually pretty simple. You need a camera here that has a hyperfocal scale. So if you look at the very front of each of these lenses, you're gonna have a scale on top. If you ever wondered what that was, that is your hyperfocal scale. Now, as you can see here on the very bottom, you're gonna have your aperture markings. Those aperture markings are going to be mirrored on both sides, and you're gonna need to take note of that. So you're gonna have f4, f8, f11, f16, and then f22 at the far end. But take note that they are mirrored on both sides. So that is on the bottom here. Right above that, you're gonna have a distance scale. And this distance scale is controlled by your focusing tab, or just the focus ring. So as you can see here on my lens, I have feet on the top and meters on the bottom, and those are gonna be your distances. So here we go. You have 3 feet or 1 meter, 4 feet or 1.2 meters, 5 feet, 1.5 meters. However way you wanna look at it, you just use that as a measuring scale. So the way this scale works, folks, and the way zone focusing works is you're gonna set a predetermined aperture. So let's start with like f8. All right, so here we go. We have our lens set to f8 on the top. And now what we wanna do is we wanna look at the very bottom ring and find f8 on the scale. So there it is, you have f4, and right in front of f4, you have f8. And as you can see, again, they are both mirrored on each side. So now that you have those markers in place, on the top of that ring, you're gonna have these little hash marks, and that's going to tell you from left to right the start and finish of the range you'll have in focus. So now that you're at f8, what I recommend doing is figure out a predetermined range of focus. So let's say you wanna capture somebody walking on the street at 5 feet. All right, so here, let's set our lens to 5 feet, and bam. So right in that dead center line, everything that is 5 feet away is going to be in focus. Now where that scale comes into play is right here on the bottom. So on the right side, which is gonna be this side here, f8 starts just a little bit between 3 and 4 feet. Starts just before 4 feet. So that means your range of focus at f8 starts just before 4 feet. So maybe 3.5 feet away. On the other hand, the f8 marker on this side is showing that your range of focus is gonna be between 7 to 10 feet. So let's just say 8.5 feet or 9 feet. So that means from right to left, everything between 3.5 feet all the way to just about 8 feet is going to be in focus when you shoot at f8. Now this works with any other aperture. So if you want to do it with f4, take your aperture, put it on into f4, which is going to be right there. And then you're going to look at those markings. And let's say you're still pre-focused at 5 feet. Now your range of focus is going to be between 1.2 meters, just about, all the way to a little bit after 5 feet. So let's just say 6 feet. 8 to 6 feet is your range of focus for f4. Let's say we shoot at f16, mark it all the way down here to f16. All right, and as you can see, the scale grows bigger because now you're having a little bit more depth of field between the two. So right up here on the right side, you have f16, and that starts off at around 2.5 feet, all the way up to what looks like right before infinity. So pretty much everything from 2.5 feet to infinity is going to be in focus. So that's just a quick little explanation of how you use zone focusing on a rangefinder camera or any camera for that matter. But now what I want to do is give you guys some simple tips that I personally use to make sure my focus is nail spot on every single time using zone focusing. But before we get into that, you guys, I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to our sponsor for this episode, the good folks over at Squarespace. Squarespace is your all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Nowadays in 2023, one of the best ways to get your name out and personal brand online is to have your own dedicated website. Luckily, Squarespace makes it super simple. They have award-winning templates that you can use within minutes to get your website up and running. They even give you pages like portfolios where you can have your own portfolio or just display your street photography, an e-commerce shop, and possibly one of my newest favorite features, the client appointment scheduling tab. If you do any family portraits or if you are a working photographer, you can easily have them book you and see what available time slots you have available. That way there's no confusion and back and forth emails. This way your clients can book you directly from your website with no hassle whatsoever. So I highly recommend you guys get started with your own professional website. Head over to squarespace.com/kingjapes and enter promo code kingjapes at checkout, and you guys can receive 10% off of your first purchase of a domain or a website. Huge thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this episode. Okay. All right, so tip number one, you guys, learn your distances. So something that I've done in the past is I'll take my camera and then I'll focus on something, let's say like it's the plant in front of me or the coffee mug 5 feet away. I'll sit there and I'll just focus. After that, I'll take a tape measure and I'll stretch it out to see if I correctly guess the distance. And the idea here is you're gonna be trying to practice how far things are towards you. It's almost like a little superpower that you can develop skill for to be able to tell how far things are. So in front of me, I think you guys are about 1.5 feet away. Let me just focus to 1.5 feet. And then let's see if that is in focus. Bingo, I'm right on the dot. I could be lying on, I don't know. But you wanna learn your distances. This is gonna allow you to not only figure out what distance you're comfortable photographing in, but it's gonna help you with zone focusing so you can catch them within that range of focus so you never miss focus. The next thing that I do is I set a pinpoint focus. And what that means is, let's say I know that I photograph typically people that are 6 feet away. I'll go to my camera and I'll set my distance to 6 feet. And if I set my camera to 5.6 or f8, there's a little room before that and a little bit after 6 feet that's going to be in focus. So now I know if they're about 4.5 feet to, let's say, 8 feet away, they're still gonna be in focus because my pinpoint focus is set to 6 feet. I hope that makes sense. I'm gonna try to put up a little diagram here on the screen. Hopefully that makes a lot more sense. Another tip is to get used to shooting with smaller apertures. So you can really only zone focus between f4 and f16. Anything before f4 honestly is considered wide open to me, and there's not really a huge range of focus that you can capture. So with f4, depending on the focal length as well, that's where I feel like you'll have a little bit of a window to capture your subjects in. Typically I like to shoot at f8 or f5.6, depending on the look that you want to get and just, keeping in mind depth of field. If you shoot everything at f16, everything's going to look flat and in focus. And if you shoot at like f5.6, f4, you're still going to have a little bit of depth of field to kind of separate between the backgrounds and your foregrounds. It's all really up to you and how you want it to look, but just get used to shooting with smaller apertures because zone focusing really works if you have a depth of field that is wide enough to be able to capture a range of focus. Now, if you are shooting a rangefinder, one thing that is beneficial to learn about your lens is where each of your focusing tab positions have your distance set to. So if I'm all the way to the left on my lens here, I know that I'm at close focus, which is 0.5 meters, roughly about 1.5 feet away. Now, if my focus tab here is set all the way to the right, then I know that this is going to be set to infinity. This means if I want to capture something that is super far away, all I got to do is knock my lens all the way to the right. Or if I know that somebody is going to be 1.5 feet away and I want to capture that in focus, knock the lens all the way to the left. That way they are within range. Another beneficial point that you want to keep in mind is if you take your lens tab here and set it to the middle, right dead center, what distance is that? For my lens, that is about 1 meter. And it's just good to know, you kind of have these, I want to say like these little set notches that you can go to that you can kind of understand where your focus is. So it's just something to keep in mind. I think that's a little bit more advanced for people who want to pull focus really quickly, but it's still definitely worth mentioning because of the zone focusing technique. And my last tip for you guys is going to be more of a practical use situation. And this tip is to set your focus before you go out and shoot and leave it. So set it and forget it. What I often do is I'll set my lens to 5.6 and I'll pre-focus to about sometimes like 2 meters, which is about 7 feet. And because I'm at 5.6 on my specific lens here, I have between 5 feet and roughly 10 feet in focus. So that is a really nice range to capture people as they walk. So if you're doing street photography in like a crowded location, somewhere in San Francisco, Chicago, New York, LA, anywhere where there is a ton of people, stop your lens down a little bit, 5.6, f8, and have a predetermined range of focus, set it and forget it, and your camera essentially becomes a point and shoot. Now that this camera can capture that range of focus that you don't have to worry about anymore, you can focus more so not on like the technical settings and how to achieve proper exposure in your focus, but focus more on telling a story, focus more on composition, focus more on looking around and seeing what's available to capture, because as you progress through street photography, your camera shouldn't be getting in the way of your eyes. So one thing you need to do, and so one thing that I always try to keep in mind is keep things simple, set it and forget it, and go out and try to document life. So that is one of my favorite techniques to do for street photography, zone focusing, and just having those predetermined ranges of focus that you can use to always have your camera ready to go. But that's gonna wrap it up for me, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know in the comment section down below if you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. As always, Minolta Gang. Whew.